Hey, welcome back to Real World Laravel, a series where I take you into one of my production SaaS apps that I've built with Laravel, and we build a new feature, and I just bring you along with me so you can learn and see how I actually do it. So today we're actually not going to be building a feature. We're going to be doing a bit of an optimization. I wouldn't even call it a bug fix. It's just optimization. So we're going back to buckets. All right, you already saw the thumbnail, so you know what's going on here, but let's jump into buckets and see what it looks like. So in buckets, we have two screens. We have buckets and transactions. Of course, we have some other screens, profile and settings and all that, but for the main app, we have buckets and transactions, these two screens. As I click back and forth between buckets and transactions, so click, 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 you can see buckets loads pretty fast, almost instantly after I click. 1, 2, click. Transactions, however, 1, 2, click. There's a little bit of a hitch, a little bit of a stutter right after you click the link while it's loading up all the data that it needs for that page. So I've noticed this in production, and actually I'll show you in production. I'll have to blur out a little bit here because this is my actual finances. I actually use buckets myself, so but you can see, so I've got 6 buckets and then I don't know how many transactions, some number of transactions. And it's the same thing. Click, 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 click. So as I go back and forth, you can see when I click the transaction screen, there's just that little bit of stutter that takes a second for it to pull up. So I've noticed this for a while in production. I wasn't really worried about it. Like I figured there's something I could do to optimize this, but it's fine. So this is a lesson in premature optimization. Don't do it. Even though I knew something was going on here, I was like, I'll worry about it later. Let's get this out the door, get it launched, and see if we get some users. So the other day, I was like, I wonder what it is. Let's take a look. So we'll go back to locals. This is our local environment. And if we go over to our app service provider and we re-enable our debug bar so we can refresh, you will see buckets. Okay, we have 74 queries being executed on this page. 74 queries. We only have 11 buckets, so obviously there's something going on there. And then look at what happens when I click over to the transaction screen. 644 database queries, 488 of which are duplicates. Yeah, I'd say that's a problem. That's a little bit too many database queries, right? Now remember, even though I'm executing 644 database queries, it only showed up as a little bit of a hitch. Okay, that's enough talking. Let's jump into the code and see why this is happening. So we're seeing all these queries because in my app, I'm using these two attributes, with and appends. So we're going to look at 2 models, but we'll start with the user because this one is smaller. So the difference between these 2 attributes is with is you pass it relations, and when you want to eager load those relations. So you'll often see with as the fix actually for some performance problems. When you have the n+1 query problem, you're saying, I know I need this relationship, go ahead and load it up front with 1 query instead of 1 query for every single model in the list, right? So you're probably familiar with. Putting it in this attribute just means it applies to every single eloquent query you have that uses the user. So in this case, the user, because it's on my user model. The appends attribute is similar, but it doesn't do it on every query. Instead, you can see it appends it to the model's array form. So it's going to get these attributes on your model, which are basically just functions on your model. And whenever you turn it into its array form, which for me, because I'm using inertia, means JSON. That's how inertia does requests after the initial page load. It'll make a request and get JSON back. So every time I'm turning my models into their JSON form, it's going to append these attributes. And the problem is I'm using attributes in these lists that actually run database queries. So it's basically n+1, but not with relationships because these are just functions on my model. So I'm calculating these things myself. So let's jump in to start fixing it and see how it goes. So if we go back to buckets itself, and I zoomed in here for you. So on the bucket screen, we've got 73 queries. Transactions is at 652. So we'll look at transactions because it's such a massive number. Okay, so 652. So now if we go back over to VS Code, and let's actually just comment out this whole thing, and we'll comment out the with block as well. So if we just comment both of them out and refresh the transaction page, all right, we just cut off 30 queries. So we're down to 622. Not bad. That's better. We have a long way to go here. When I'm solving this kind of problem as I go, I like to make one change. So for example, we commented out those fields on the user, and then I like to kind of click through the app, think about everywhere I'm using a user model, and just check and make sure everything looks right. So we can do that in a couple places. So for example, we see the email. Okay, we see the name. That looks fine. That's all good up there. When I look at a bucket, if I leave it, okay, that's the bucket's owner's name. That looks fine. On the settings screen, actually it would be the account screen. I can see the stuff here. That looks fine. But this is interesting. So I'm seeing it's telling me sign up for Buckets Unlimited, but I know this user, if we look at the database, test user 1, just make this wider, friend of Sam. So this is a column I have to just make someone unlimited lifetime so that I can use it for like friends and family. I just set it to true and they don't have to pay. So this is set for the Sam test user, which is who we're logged in as. So we should be seeing a subscription here. So if we go back to VS Code and we look at what were we appending? We were appending is unlimited, is self-paid, is lifetime. So basically all this information about payments. So if we go to our handle inertia requests middleware, okay, yeah, so we're just saying set the user to the user. Great. So basically we need to append this information now here because we're doing it here. Okay, so let's do that. So the user might be null. So before I call any methods on it, I'm going to save it in a variable, and then we'll say if maybe user, I can't type. Okay, then we'll say maybe user append, and we will pass in all those same things from the user model. So let's just go grab those real quick. Drop them in here. And then semicolon, okay. All right, so there we go. So now we need to pass the user here, of course. Let's set this to maybe user. Okay. So now if we go look and refresh our screen, okay, we can see, yes, we are subscribed. So cool, that worked. Now you might be thinking, that's weird. Like, how does this actually help with queries? Because if you look, okay, we're down to, let's go back to our transaction screen. We're still down about 30 queries from our original number, but all we did was move this append into the inertia share method, which runs on every single request. So define the props that are shared by default. So every inertia request, we're going to do this. So you're probably like, what the heck? How did that help? Well, if we think about everywhere we use the user model. So for example, I showed you when we were testing, we saw if I click leave on this bucket, you can see, oh, Katie Lewis will have to share it with you again to rejoin. So that's not the user we're logged in as. That's the user that owns this bucket. So when we retrieve this bucket, we're also retrieving the user model that owns it. And in this case, all we need is their name. We don't need to query their unlimited status, but we were doing that before because we had it on the user model itself. So now we're saving a handful of database queries wherever we're using a user model, and we don't need those attributes. So this is nice. We're saying, okay, sometimes we need that, put it right where we need it in the query, and leave it alone everywhere else. So, okay, one problem solved. Let's just start knocking them out. So that's the user. For now, I think we're okay with that. With the user model, we'll just leave them commented out, and I'll come back and clean this up later. So the other model where we're doing a lot of this is the bucket. The width, I don't think will be too bad here. We're basically just saying anytime you load a bucket, go ahead and grab the name, email, and time zone of the creator. I think that's okay, but we'll come back to this. We can probably put this in a controller somewhere where we're actually using it. Let's start with appends. So we'll start with display amount. So that's this number you see right on the front of the bucket. Okay, great. But I know when I think about a bucket, I'm not always showing the display amount. So for example, for every transaction on the transaction screen, we're actually showing the bucket that it belongs to. And we show the bucket name, and then the little underline is the bucket color from the home screen. So Sam Fun Money is that blue, and you can see it's the same blue over here. So all I really need here is the title of the bucket, or the name of the bucket, and the color. But when I have all these attributes, display amount, shared, is creator, spent this month, spent all time, all of these things are running on every single one of these transactions. So it's basically an N+1 query problem, but I kind of created it by using the appends attribute instead of having like a relationship on my model. I'm just saying every time you get a bucket, get all this information, and we don't need that. So let's start chipping away at these two. So display amount, if we comment that out, if we refresh the transaction screen, boom, 469 queries. We just took like 150-ish off. So that's big. And you can see everything looks fine here. There is one case that I know of where this will not work. So if we choose yes, so remaining, you can see now we get not a number. Before, this was the display amount. So let's go fix this part. Okay. If we go to our transactions controller, so if request has, so that's what we want to look at, because we're saying, okay, when there's a specific bucket selected up here, then this is our bucket. So all we need to do is append. Actually, I'll just put it on a new line, append, and I'll go ahead and put it in a list just in case we have more. Okay, so append the display amount, and now we come here and refresh, and boom, we're good to go. Okay, where else are we using display amount? Yeah, on the buckets page. So all of these are not working. Okay, so buckets controller. Let's go check that. Buckets is just auth user buckets get. So we need in here, we need to add a, or actually the append will come after the get, append, and also the display amount. What's not working here? Oh, comma. And then add my comma here. Okay. Refresh, and there we go. We got our display amount back here as well. I think that's the only places we're using display amount is here and obviously on the bucket screen. So I think we're good. Okay. So what's next? Back to our bucket model, down to our appends, shared. So let's remove shared. Let's see how that helps our queries. So we took 8 off the buckets page. We're down to 315. So that was another like 150 queries. So we're down to 315. Okay. And on this screen, on transactions, I don't think we use shared at all anywhere. So boom, done. Just removed a bunch of queries. Here, we use shared to show the little shared icon in the top right for any buckets that have more than one user. So if I look at the share, so you can see we are sharing this bucket, but it's not showing up. So if we go fix it, you'll see what I'm talking about. So buckets controller. In this, we also need to, let's go ahead and put these on a new line. And we need to also do shared. We need shared for the buckets page. Okay, there we go. So now you can see this little share icon for the buckets that are shared. Okay, so there we go. We just cut off a bunch more queries, 150 something off the transaction screen. So back to our bucket model. What is next? We've got is creator. I'm going to skip that for now because if we look at that attribute, it's actually very simple. Get is creator. It's just comparing, like, make sure we have a user and compare the ID to the creator ID. So I'm not really running any queries on this. We already have the creator ID. It's just part of the model. So we'll leave that one alone for now and skip down to spent this month and spent all time. So these are similar things. They're both like stats. So I'm just going to do them both at once. So we're on our transaction screen. Wow. We just went from 315 queries down to 10 queries. Now, obviously something will break here because this is our stats page. So our spent this month and our spent all time are not working. So obviously we need these on this page, but we only need it for the bucket we're actually looking at. That's the big difference. We don't need it for every bucket in this list or every bucket that has a transaction, which is what we were doing before. So Let's go fix that in our transaction controller. So that's for this actual bucket. So we will add another attribute here. What was it? Spent this month and spent all time, I believe. Need to add a comma. There we go. Refresh. Okay, there we go. So now we have this data back. So we fixed it, and we're still only at 15 queries. We're at 315, I'm pretty sure, before this. So we just took off 300 queries by doing that. Okay, so I mean, we've pretty much fixed it at this point. So now I'm gonna keep clicking around and just like check everywhere that I know like a user is used. Okay, we still have the name. Let's check like the account screen. That still looks right. Settings, everything should be fine here. That's just stuff on the user model. I think we're good. Let's check all the different types of buckets on this screen. I really should have some end-to-end testing, which I do plan to add, but I have not added it yet. That would be a much better way to make sure everything is working rather than clicking through manually. But spent this month, $20, that makes sense. So I think we're okay here. If we check like one of my test buckets, all right, let's just pick one of the tests. That one has probably one transaction for $20, 0 this month, 20 all time. If I move this to be in this month, move that for a second because I'm so zoomed in that it's messed up. Go to September, save it, spent this month updates. Okay, so I think we're good actually. There you go. That's all it took. So let's check our final transaction numbers. On the bucket screen, you can see we've got 26 queries here, or 25. I don't know why it changed, 25 on the buckets page, and then 9 on the transaction screen. We went down from like 600 something to 9 queries, and we're showing all the same data. Everything still works. So there you have it. That's a pretty major improvement for our app. It is a little bit snappier when you load that transaction screen, but maybe more importantly is as our users grow, we're not going to be doing 600 queries every time we load this transaction screen. So as we get more users, we're not going to start to overload our database. We've cut that down massively. So that feels great. Very happy with it. Just remember, if you are going through and removing some of these attributes or some of these values from the with and the appends attributes, do it one at a time and really take your time, like click through your app, think about everywhere that you're using that attribute on that model, and just make sure you cover your bases and all of your controllers and other places where you're querying the data. This would be a nasty bug to push to production if you didn't notice it. So really you should have some end-to-end testing that checks all of these things. That's what you should do. Before you do this, write some end-to-end tests, just some basic stuff, check that your buckets display properly or the transactions load, that kind of stuff, like simple things. That'll go a long way to making sure you don't push any bugs. But the moral of the story is if you use the with and appends attributes and you're looking at Laravel debug bar and you're like, whoa, that's way too many queries, try commenting out 1 or 2 of those appends and just see what happens. Maybe you're making queries where you don't need to and you can save on performance and save resources. So that's it for this video. I usually talk about like what would I tweak before I push it to prod. In this case, nothing really. I'm going to go clean up the code. I'm not going to leave those commented attributes in there. I'll just delete them entirely, but that's about it. A little bit of code cleanup and then it'll be ready to ship. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to like it and subscribe. I've got more videos coming up soon, some about inertia, some more in this Real World Laravel series. So if you enjoy these, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss them. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.